I always worry about is that same concept playing out when the stakes are much, much higher, right? We talked about
Sure.
Hitler and different things. When your mind leads you astray, when you can't strike that right balance and question enough to make sure you're doing it right, it can lead to bad things. So you mentioned in the beginning, again, the convoy of trucks. Let's get into the politics of it, because I think we have to have this conversation.
Sure.
But this isn't me saying one side is right or wrong, right? In the spirit of
Right.
it, who knows? But how do we apply it to that, right? Because I think there's some people, as you said, that would look at that and say, well, that's courage, that's belief in the convictions. They see something that's a problem, they took a stand, they sacrificed themselves to go after it. Much in the same vein, somebody else could look at it and say, well, no, that's the situation we're talking about, right? They allowed this kind of moral righteousness to cloud their judgment, and now they have conviction in something, but maybe it's the wrong thing. Maybe they're actually doing more harm than good. Maybe it's not going to end in a better outcome. Again, I'm not saying that's the case, but in that situation, let's take that one live. How do you personally assess that to say, yes, they're doing the right thing? That is what they should be doing.
It's hard to make that judgment on other people without knowing all the circumstances.
Okay.
So I believe that they achieved a lot of what they wanted, because before they were dispersed brutally by the police, the leader of our opposition had been sacked. The police chief of Ottawa had been sacked. The city councillor in Ottawa, who was making a lot of noise, who was the chairman of the police board, had been fired. Within days of the protest, or even while the truck protest was on, mandates were being dropped in various provinces around our country and in many places over the world, because convoys sprung up all over the world, in New Zealand and many countries. Was it all directly results? No one will ever know, but it seems too coincidental to say there was absolutely no effect. It also exposed the weak leadership of our country, and the hypocrisy of tolerating Black Lives Matter. And I'll say the word, protests in Vancouver 2 years ago, where they closed huge whole blocks of cities, they attacked police stations, there was arson, rioting, very little action was taken. And yet when it's truckers, they send the riot squad in and trample Indigenous women with horses. That may or may not have been an accident, but it was totally irresponsible to put those horses in there when there was no violence from the crowd. I mean, many of those protesters were kneeling and singing hymns and saying the Lord's Prayer, right? And then they were getting beaten by the cops. So did the truckers do the right thing? We'll never know. I believe their heart was in the right place. I believe many of them had their backs against the wall. They could not work because they were told they had to have the jab to go across the border. So they were a bit like me back in Zimbabwe, saying we've got nothing to lose and we might achieve something. Let's go for it.
Yeah.
What they did do, and I stood on a bridge here near where I live, and I could not believe how many people were out supporting that convoy. We're talking hundreds of thousands of people all down the highways. And I would phone my business partner, who you know who I'm talking about, Kathleen, while I was on that bridge. Now, here's a guy from Africa who's never experienced real cold before. Well, I have in Canada, but that's in my bones. So I'm standing out -6 centigrade, which is, I don't know,
too cold,
28 Fahrenheit, snowing hard, a bitter wind. I mean, bitter wind. And we're standing there for 3 hours to wait for the convoy. And when I saw the crowd and the good nature of the crowd, a woman in a pickup comes along, and we're shoulder to shoulder and 3 deep on this highway bridge, right? Woman comes along the pickup, stops, says, here's some donuts, gives us a whole box of a dozen donuts. I said, no, well, let me give you some money. No. She's got about 10 of these boxes in the car, and she's just handing them out to people on the bridge. And then coffee. And, everyone's chatting. And I phoned Kathleen and I said, she can hear, I'm full of emotion. I said, I've always felt a foreigner in the 18 years I've been in Canada. Today, I'm really proud to be a Canadian. And that's how much it affected me. So the truckers achieved that, right? Not just for me. Guys I talked to, hard-bitten, cynical men were saying I had tears in my eyes. So if nothing else, those truckers did a good job.
Yeah, no, and I think you're highlighting the nuance and complexity of these, because what I wonder is, and again, in the spirit of trying to understand it, it's not passing judgment at all.
Sure.
Wouldn't we have to assume that the government, maybe, right? Maybe not. Maybe I'm being naive in that, but that the government or those that didn't support the convoy very much had a similar thought process, that they were being courageous to their convictions, right? You mentioned all the people that got fired and the government and the police. I could imagine, I'm not saying it's right? Because take good and bad out of it. Just take what people's intention is. A lot of people may have thought on the other side, the virus is dangerous. There's all sorts of risks. Maybe there's risks in this convoy. It's hurting the economy. I understand it's not popular. I understand it's against maybe the typical principles we live by in Canada, but I'm going to do the courageous thing and stick to my convictions and break up this protest. I'm going to stop people from, fighting against the virus, all that type of stuff. How do you think about that? How do you reconcile that? Because it gets to me, the core of this whole thing, when you're acting in accordance with your convictions and being courageous in that, if everybody's doing that and it runs into conflict, well, now you have the situation you have. And it doesn't mean that one side is evil or one side is not. It just means, they see the world differently.
And you're absolutely right. I mean, I've come across people who are aghast, horrified that the truckers could do that. And again, we've got this, our mainstream media has influenced this in a certain way. I have a 94-year-old lady that's from the previous church I keep in touch with, and my wife takes her to the doctor and all those things. So I talk to her 2 or 3 times a week, make sure she's okay. And she was saying about the convoy in Ottawa. She says, it's terrible. They're stealing food from the homeless and they're urinating on the soldier's tomb and they're this and that. And I said, where are you getting that from? Well, I only watch CBC and sometimes CTV. I said, well, let me tell you a real story, that there are veterans guarding the tomb with their medals on their uniform to make sure there's no desecration. I said, we have a hero, Terry Fox statue. She says, yeah, but they put a flag in his hand. I said, I'd far rather they have a Canadian flag in his hand than 2 years ago they stuck a pride flag in his hand and no one complained about that. So how can you say that's desecrating a hero statue? And they're stealing food from the homeless. I said, there was one incident, apparently somebody demanded food. I said, but there's countless incidents of the supporters of the truckers feeding the homeless. The homeless are lining up with the truckers to get fed. There's pictures of people sweeping the streets, clearing snow, picking up garbage, going into the restaurants, the few that remained open, and cleaning tables and floors because they're allowed to use the washroom. So I said, this is biased reporting. So I feel that some people's convictions are fed by the media and that can be manipulated. But I acknowledge, I agree with what you say, that, and it's taken me a long time to realize this. Prior to coming to Canada, I felt any liberal had to be nuts. Couldn't understand how any intelligent person could be on the liberal side. And then I realized that they're just as committed to their ideals as I am to mine. And I have to respect that. I might not agree with it, but I have to respect it. So yes, those people have convictions. My opinion is that they're unfairly, incorrectly influenced by the biased media. So for an example, right now, while this whole Russian-Ukrainian thing's on, I'm suspicious because all the mainstream media are saying the same thing as they did with the coronavirus. So what's the real story? So I watch RT, the Russian program, and I see this morning pictures of Russian soldiers handing out bottled water and food to people in the Ukraine, right, feeding them. And I see an interview with a Ukrainian woman saying, thank God the Russians have come, they've taken out these Azov thugs that were murdering us and beating us up and listening. So who's exactly right, who's wrong? I don't know, but it's not what's being portrayed, right?
Yeah, I want to go back for a second, to the protests and things, because and I don't have a conclusion here necessarily, but you mentioned Black Lives Matter. I think you mentioned pride flag, that type of thing. It always makes me think, because America obviously very similar. We have similar kind of division, and we have people. I know plenty of people who've said the same things going both ways, and I can't help but think, as you explain the situation of the protest and the reaction to it, and some people saying the protest is horrible and they're doing bad things, and then other people defending it and saying, no, there might be a little bit of that, but by and large, these are peaceful people trying to do something they believe in. If you keep it high level like that, you can apply that to both situations, right? The Black Lives Matter protests here in America, same thing, right? There's some people that looked at it and said, oh, they're causing destruction, they're doing damage, and I'm sure there was some of that. So that's a horrible thing. We need to stop it. But then there was people on the other side that said, no, that's just what you're hearing in the news. That's a very little bit of it. These are peaceful people who are just trying to get change in the world because people have been hurt, and Black people and people of color are being hurt. And it's almost the same exact argument, just the other way when it comes to the protest in the convoy. And it's not to say that one is right or wrong. I think it's what you're getting at. The importance is appreciating that nuance, not just believing what you're told, not just blindly saying, well, this is the team I'm on, or this is what I think, and I go with it. It's appreciating the complexity of it and understanding that we're probably not nearly as different as we think. And if we're consistent in how we approach it and how we assess it, I think that goes a long way. And I think sometimes our judgment gets clouded for various reasons, right? We all do it,
Sure.
myself included.